Lindsay, the Frugal Crafter, and you're watching Home and Garden for Mere Mortals. Today I'm going to show you how to make a pretty garden stepping stone that can also be used for a trivet inside of your home. I'm using plaster of Paris because I love the colors and the smooth texture of it, and it's a great medium for working with children because it's non-toxic and it makes a lovely little garden marker. But if you want something that's a little bit more durable for you to use as a high traffic pathway, I recommend that you use your favorite cement. Now let's go to the table and I'm going to show you how to make this. You will need plaster of Paris or cement and of course water, marbles, gems, or tiles for making your design, a cake pan or other mold for molding the stepping stone, contact paper, Vaseline, a mixing bucket and cup, and if you want to tint your plaster of Paris, you're going to want some acrylic paint or tempera paint. The first thing I did was I traced the bottom of my cake pan onto a piece of contact paper, and now I'm cutting it out, and that's going to make a sticky pad for me to put on the bottom of my pan, and it will help keep any little tiles or marbles in place while I make my design. That way when I pour in my plaster of Paris later, it's not going to shift anything. You also want to go ahead and grease the edges of your pan using Vaseline or some other mold release. Now this is my favorite part of the project, laying out the design. I decided to use large flat-backed marbles from the dollar store or any craft and hobby store, and also these little squiggles which came from the dollar store. But you could use tiles, you could use broken plates, you can use pre-made mosaic elements. It's completely up to you. You could even use pretty rocks and pebbles and beach glass that you've picked up along your travels. It's an excellent project for kids to get involved in because they can really let their creativity shine. Even if you decide to do the cement stepping stone, this step would be exactly the same. You might want to choose more opaque gems if you're using cement because the color of the cement is kind of dark and it could show through. But since I'm using a yellow plaster of Paris, this is going to be just fine. I decided to fill in the remainder of my design with some clear gems just for a little extra sparkle. Press the gems well into the contact paper, and now we're ready to mix our plaster. When mixing plaster of Paris, you're going to need 1 part water and 2 parts powdered plaster of Paris. I like to use a disposable container such as a yogurt or cereal cup to mix it. That way, if it gets all gunky, I can just toss it. You want to slowly sprinkle the plaster of Paris onto the water so it can kind of gently float and get mixed up without getting too bubbly. I use my fingers as a sieve just to kind of break up that plaster a bit. And if there are any clumps, you can kind of squish them apart at this point as well. Get 2 parts plaster to 1 part water. Now gently mix the plaster of Paris until it has the consistency of yogurt. It will take about 30 to 45 seconds for it to mix up and become this creamy. Once it's well blended like this, you can add some acrylic paint or poster paint to the mixture to tint it, and that will be nice because that way if your stepping stone ever chips, it'll be colored all the way through. But you could always paint it afterwards if you don't want to do this step. Now the paint will get really thick a few seconds after adding the paint, so you want to make sure you have your pan ready to go. And then just scoop out the plaster right into your cake pan, and then you want to spread it around and try to get it on top of all the marbles so it can sink in. Use your spatula or mixing spoon just to spread the plaster around and make sure it fills the entire cavity of the mold. Now you want to wiggle and jiggle the pan and kind of tap it onto your work surface to make sure that all that plaster really sinks down and fills in all the spaces between the marbles. I spent about 1.5 minutes doing this, so don't rush a step. Make sure that that plaster really gets in there. It'll get kind of like a glossy, liquidy look on the top if you're doing it right. Let your plaster of Paris dry for an hour or 2, and then turn your cake pan over and flip out your mold onto your table. Then remove the contact paper to see your design. Since the plaster is not completely set at this point, you can use a putty knife or a spatula to gently scrape off some of the extra plaster that is stuck to the front of your marbles. Then you can clean your design up further by wiping it with a damp sponge. Look how pretty it looks now. I wanted to show you a mistake I made with the first stepping stone I made. I let the plaster sit too long before pouring it, and you can probably see the pits and air bubbles that are around the edges of my stone. It's okay, but it's not as pretty as the second one I made that we just did together. You can see how I got a much smoother surface and how it looks much more uniform and vibrant just because I poured the plaster right after mixing it. So keep that in mind when you're doing your projects. After you've wiped off any excess plaster from your marbles, you want it to dry for another day or two, and then add either a coat of resin or some clear polyurethane to make sure it'll stand the test of time outside in the elements. Or put bumpers on the bottom and use it as a coaster on your kitchen table. I hope you enjoyed this project, and I hope you try it with your kids. If you like this, please check out my channel, The Frugal Crafter, where I have daily craft, DIY, and painting tutorials for you to enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.